thank you for agreeing to participate in this, the third meeting of members of the American Psychoanalytic Association. And we're here to talk about whether our field can be useful on the world stage to address the conflicts that surround us. We seem to be pretty good at helping individual people resolve internal conflicts, but we seem incapable of taking that knowledge and transferring it to address polarization in our country and in the world. And so I invited you to come together to talk about this. I'll tell you just a little bit about my hypothesis about why we can't seem to do that. We're just as bad as everyone else. We weaponize our insights and throw them at one another so liberally. I think that what needs to happen is that we need to develop a theoretical model that addresses difference rather than pathology. So the world is getting so small, and we have different ideologies, different political beliefs, different religious beliefs, and different ways of behaving based on our identities. And we come up against each other, and it's a head-on collision so many times. Somehow we have to find a way to negotiate that space. So I think of it as some psychology of difference, psychoanalysis of difference rather than pathology. And the other piece of this is, again, this is my hypothesis. I could be wrong. I'm just telling you where I'm coming from. That is that these dialogues need to be public. I've been challenged about that over and over. A number of people decided not to continue because it made them too uncomfortable to think about being public. But I think if we're going to deal with differences, we need an analyst. And I think of the audience as the analytic third, as something we can imagine to help us look at our conflicts from an empathic, analytic, to ask different questions than we would if we had people in our room. For example, I've done a number of these dialogue projects with other groups of people. They always come down to religion. They come down to God. It's some core or dynamic in the human race. If you're talking to individuals, there's a huge spectrum between God and religion as wonderful, identity, community, meaning, being a good person, living a worthy life. The other end of the spectrum is psychotic religiosity. In between, you have all sorts of conflicts related to religion. We're not here to analyze our individual dynamics related to religion. We're here to think about what it is about this God thing that seems to be so compelling, and yet wars happen around it all the time. What's that going on about that? And I bring that up because that was the question that we left off with. The first two meetings, Katrina said something that was very charged. And we emailed about it afterwards, and we were going to go there in the second meeting, but I think it was defensively, and also because we just needed to get to know each other. We didn't get a chance to go there. So I'm hoping we can go there now and think about some of the questions that you're going to raise and see where it takes us. So if anyone has any thoughts about that, feel free to ask. Otherwise, Katrina, why don't you share what you said, what you believe, and we can take it from there.
Yeah, well, thanks, Alice. I saw your email and I was trying to remember exactly what I said, but if I'm understanding you, I think you're sort of wanting me to repeat the gist of my position, right? Which is that we need Christianity, that the loss of Christianity in the West has been a disaster for the human race in the West, for all of us, that kind of the quote unquote killing of God has left us, extremely adrift, without moral guidance, without, really by killing God, we've killed truth. And we see that now in, that people can't seem to agree on some core fundamental aspects of our reality, on what truth is. It's a sort of Tower of Babel situation where we have these kind of competing, your truth, my truth, these competing narratives. And I think it's making people, I mean, certainly anxious, conflictual, but maybe at a deeper level, there's even this sort of existential angst and uncertainty. I think people in some ways are even becoming psychotic, and I don't necessarily mean in the florid sense, but the psychosis of I don't know what's real, I don't know what I can cling to, so I'm going to find something, right? And you see this in the way that people jump from one cause to another. They cling to Ukraine, right? Ukraine is a cause. Everybody's displaying the Ukraine flags in front of their house, and then it jumps to Palestine. That's the new cause. And I would say there's sort of no consistency, no through line. People are being preyed upon and controlled like marionettes by the sort of media industrial complex. And I've really tried to give this a lot of thought and think through to the logical conclusion and implication. And where I've landed it at is we need God, and God is the higher authority, the metaphysical, kind of structure that helps us see that there's something outside ourselves and that is a source of truth beyond the human, kind of petty human squabbles and the human world. Certainly curious what you all think about that.
Can I ask you a question? When you talk about God and the Christian God, how literal is that belief? In other words, is it like Freudian psychoanalysis? The id, ego, and superego, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, as that's if you picture that entity, it's useful, but it's not a thing that um, has a concrete reality. I'm just curious whether you see the Christian God as the one true sort of literal God, or as an organizing worldview that, yes, the founding fathers separated um, religion from politics, but the religion was Christianity. Can you be a little more specific about it?
The religion was Christianity. I agree with you, Alice, and the US was founded on Christian principles. Well, I do believe that the Christian God is the one true God, and the Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. I do believe that. And, you know, I guess I'll reference kind of a couple thinkers here. So one of my favorite current writers is Paul Kingsnorth, and he converted to Orthodox Christianity after a period of trying, all kinds of different things, such as Buddhism and even Wicca. And I like his framing. Well, first of all, that every human culture on this planet has and has had what he calls the three P's: people, place, and prayer. And prayer refers to the sacred source or the kind of sacred mythology of a culture, right? And of course we see that different cultures have had their different sacred sources, whether it's being up in the sky, or whether it's simply a geographic landmark, such as a mountain or a stream is sacred. So for better or for worse, the Western world was built on the mythology of Christianity. And here's where I think Paul makes a good point, in that he's rather against cultural Christianity. What he calls cultural Christianity, what other people call cultural Christianity, he says it's like having a body without a heart, right? So if we're going to have Christianity and if we're going to organize our societies around it, it needs to have the heart, and that's the beating heart of belief. So that there need to be enough people. I'm not saying everybody's going to believe. I'm sure that's never been the case. I'm sure, in Roman times, not everybody believed in all of the gods, but they went along with the prevailing mythology, right? So I think to kind of channel Paul here is that we need to have the beating heart of Christianity, and maybe we could say that those are the true believers, that are organized around the church, and then you're going to have people, probably it's like concentric circles, right, where they might endorse some level of belief, maybe all the way out to the outer edges where they might profess themselves to be atheist, but they go along with the prevailing Christian morality. So I don't know if that answers your question, but personally, I think if one is going to become Christian, like what's the point if you don't really believe it? That's sort of my
Well, that's
down dirty, I guess, take on that.
so then what would you say to someone like Michelle, who is religious from a different center? And I'm curious what you have to say about this,
What I have to say about it?
if you're willing or not.
It's so hard for me to talk. I have to say, the last conversation that we had where I actually came out as a conservative, and it allowed me to, as a board member of my institute, to come out, and it was very, very difficult. And then to have another conversation. And so right now I am exhausted. I'm exhausted from being such a minority in the psychoanalytic world. So I feel, I'm not a Christian, obviously, I'm an Orthodox Jew. I do believe what was her name? Who was on last time? Sylvia had said Judeo-Christian. I think that, there are things with Jews and Christians that are really awkward to talk about. There are differences. I do believe, though, as a religious person, I am more connected with someone from another religion. Now, there's also religion that's barbarous and killing and horrible. And so religion is a very charged thing. And I also, in my background, I was not raised religious. I became religious in my 20s. And it has been something that, I struggled with. I really, really struggled with it. And, but it's a very, very important part of my life, and very important in these very turbulent times that has helped me. But I am in such a minority, and when I read the listserv, I'm just alone. I feel like only Katrina thinks like I'm not brave as brave as Katrina is to speak out. And I have done it now with my institute, and it is very, very, very difficult.
I didn't realize that you did not come out until this. Oh, wow.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, as a conservative, right? You didn't come out as a conservative, yeah, till then.
Yes, but it felt like so extreme. It was, there were so many repercussions about it.
Yeah.
Well, not well. The first here it was helpful because I think, Katrina, you were very helpful to me, knowing that you exist. The next time where we were talking, and it was an echo chamber. It was a board meeting. It was an echo chamber, and I had a different point of view, and I actually said it. And I was met with absolute silence, very awkward. Like it was like this came from someplace unexpected. So to be the only one in a sea of so many people who don't feel like me is extraordinarily difficult, and it's gotten to the point where it's somewhat depressing. Mm-hmm. It's been really hard. So I was looking forward to this group because it is a place where we really try and talk about this very, very important problem.
Well, is the problem about Christianity? Is the problem about how to hold a minority status in the presence of people who feel differently?
I think it is maybe it's religion is such a hard thing to quantify. I've always seen things differently. I've sort of been, my own thinker since I was a child, even, in terms of having views of my own and maybe really challenging other things. That's part of my personality. And I think it's important to have these conversations, but you have to have another person to talk to from a different point of view to have a rich conversation, rather than being in an echo chamber.
Yeah, when I was in training, I was, Catholic, but I was in a world of atheist Jews. So I bonded by being, okay, we were all religious and now we're not. So we're having classes on Saturday morning instead of going to synagogue. And that was my way of bonding with my teachers.
Mhm.
And as time has gone on, I realized I'm different from them in significant ways. And but I didn't have the opportunity to go there in my training. I had to, be one of them in order to take advantage of what they had to offer me. But there was always something missing, something different.
Mhm. So what I was saying, that I had a mentor a while ago who trained at that time, and she was an observant Jew, and she had to find a Catholic supervisor because she could not, because of what you're saying, that she was, really, and this was probably in the 60s or something, probably even before you trained, but that she could not, the Jewish supervisors gave her a really hard time. So this is something anecdotally, but I can understand how something like that could happen.
Michelle, I'm sorry to hear that it's been difficult. It is hard to be that lone voice. Yeah, I really relate to that.
Well, you know what was hard?
Mm-hmm.
That there were disagreements, and we were talking about them. We weren't yelling. Nobody was raising their voice. And then when I did not vote, I guess the way they did, there was some like a discomfort. And in that discomfort, it was the fact that, oh, there's this person who doesn't quite. And I think it's a board that's going to have to get used to. We're a good board. We work together well. And I think, my hope is that we will get somewhere. But it's a role that I'm not used to and I'm not very comfortable with.
Yeah, I hope you do get through it. I think taking a kind of outsider position, right, or a position that's very much a minority in the group, I think it threatens a sense of belonging.
Mm-hmm.
And, obviously we humans are very, very wired.
Well, these are people that I'm very close to. I've known these people for a long time and I like them very, very much. And I don't think they have anything against me as a person. And I said, I hope that these differences don't affect the connections that we have, because that's very important.
It's interesting that I've often thought that our focus on, more concrete differences, like being Black or being gay or is easier to talk about than the differences in who we are as human beings, ideological differences, just our center, our psychological constellations. It seems to me that there's more of a prejudice about that, or just differences. And you're a little thrown off by somebody who believes something different from what you believe.
Mm-hmm.
You can call it a prejudice, or you can just say, I'm a little deer in headlights when I'm faced with somebody who sees something gay in a very different way from the way that I do. And I really don't like the way we throw words like, prejudice and ism words around all the time, rather than saying, let's talk about our differences.
I wonder if here I can say that there has been the death of God and the death of Christianity, right? I think that's one point, and that's important to put out there. But I think the second point is that it's not been replaced with nothing. It's been replaced by elevating progress to the role of God. And I wonder if these conflicts would make sense if we look at it through that lens, right? So progress becomes the new God, and everything must serve that goal. Everything must be progressive, right? And so then, race relations, accepting gay people, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, some of those things are good and are helpful to society, but this this train of progress has led us all the way to where people are progressing right out of their biological bodies. But I think the discomfort comes from anybody who dares to question progress. Like, sort of, how dare you not be progressive? How dare you sort of say that, dismantling yet another Chesterton's fence, so to speak, right, is going to lead us somewhere bad and not towards a progressive utopia.
It's funny, I thought you were going to say it was that what had replaced God was money. And you said progress. So I was thinking, well, there's a relationship there to some extent.
Oh, sure. Definitely.
Yep. So let's say that one more thing. I don't want to take up too much space and, allow the rest of you to talk and have your reactions, but to kind of channel Paul Kingsnorth again, he says that what has replaced people, place, and prayer, which every society needs, in our current Western paradigm, we have science, sex, and self. And maybe those are sort of the markers of progress.
So I've been going down to the state capitol building several days a week while it's in session. And we have a Republican supermajority in Tennessee. Of the 99 members of the House, 75 of them are Republicans and 24 of them are Democrats. So it's very much a supermajority. In addition, Tennessee tends to be a pretty fundamentalist Christian state, especially in the rural areas, less so in the urban areas. And so when you go to committee hearings, as an observer, when they're having a meeting on the House floor, we just observe, we can't communicate or anything. When we go to committee meetings, it's a smaller group, it might be 10, 15 people, something like that. And again, we're not supposed to, as observers, we're not supposed to interact, but we have our little signs, that we hold up. And usually it's a protest sign against whatever's being discussed that the Republicans are bringing up, because they're generally the ones that are bringing things up because they're a supermajority. And last week, there was an interesting thing. So there's this one guy, Representative Bolso, and he is Catholic, Roman Catholic, and he brought up a bill to name a certain day of the month, March 12th every year, in honor of this wonderful guy, Charlie Strobel, who died last year and was a Catholic priest here in town and had been, everybody's favorite person. And so he said, I'm bringing this up in a way to try to introduce some bipartisanship into our state, because we're so polarized. And so And he knew everybody loved Charlie. So, you know, he was trying to bring that up in that way. But my reaction sitting there, and I loved Charlie, and I knew Charlie for many years, and my sign that day said WWCD. What would Charlie do? You know, it's all a little snarky. But I was trying to think, does Representative Bolso, is he trying to really bridge a divide? Or is he trying, is this a first step to try to win, to make Charlie into a Christian nationalist, which would have been the opposite, in my humble opinion, of who Charlie was? Or did he have some other motivation? And I really thought about it, and I finally decided that it was not a good faith move on his part, that he was trying to, he had been sort of leading a lot of the conservative moves to, he has a bill now that says that children of undocumented parents cannot receive a public education in Tennessee. He voted for school vouchers, which discriminate against the poor people in the community, and other things, other positions he's taken. And so I thought, this is not a good faith move on his part to try to say, let's uphold Father Charlie. That it was a way of trying to respond to being characterized as the, you know, the Grinch in the Capitol. But that was an interesting thing, because I love Charlie. He was saying he loved Charlie. It turned out he'd never met Charlie, actually. So that was another thing that made it seem kind of like not a good faith move. But everybody voted to make that day, March 12th, to be a day to commemorate Father Charlie from here on out. Even the people who didn't think that that was a good faith move on his part, I believe. And I talked to people afterwards. So it was an interesting thing. And I've been sort of chewing on it ever since. Like, what are the motives that we have for making the claims that we make? You know, sometimes there seems to be a gap there. That's a long story to make a simple point, but anyway.
I mean, it seems to me that we're making kind of a lot of generalities and assumptions about what Christianity is, and that you mentioned, Lynn, you know, Christian nationalists, what that means. So, I mean, what's intriguing to me is, are we talking about kind of Russell Vogt, who's a very devout Christian, who has been very influential in Creative Project 2025, and whose mission is to terrorize and traumatize the public workers? Or is it Bishop Marion Budd, who spoke directly to the president, both of whom would be considered devout Christians, all of which have significant implications on what that means in terms of the culture? If we were to say, this is what we hope would represent the country. I mean, I think we have to be more specific, because God and Jesus Christ are perfect subjects with whom they can be used to represent all kinds of things. And we may not even agree what they mean to us, and yet we use those words interchangeably. There's just so many assumptions.
It's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing is, religion is so personal. You know, you know, I don't even understand it myself. And you know, and another thing, and all the things that are coming at us so fast, you know, we understand so little about what is happening. And I find the analytic community somewhat pompous, you know, and that bothers me a lot. I feel, to just have that humility of how little we know, you know. And yes, things do get talked about in generalities, and we really can't get to understanding, I mean, what it is even for ourselves. let alone the analytic couple, and now we want to bring it out into the wider world. It's quite a challenge.
Yeah, the good thing about one-on-one is you have time to dive into the details and overcome some of the generalities in a one-on-one relationship, in a consulting room, whatever. Well, so Jack, how do you think people could overcome those generalities when we're talking about large group behavior?
Well, I mean, I'm struck by how we started out talking about what it feels like to be an isolated one-off person, to be kind of in the minority. And I think one of the risks that I think we're heading into is making a characterization where power and authority and legislation gets connected to making the decision, okay, we're all going to belong to this church. We're all going to follow this, that allows a minority to influence perhaps the majority, or that confuses the whole question of what is our personal freedom. That feels more like the questions, can we keep our own independence and our own freedom to believe what we want to believe and not impinge on somebody else's belief? And it feels like that is becoming more and more difficult.
I consider one of the most interesting things in my life, over the many years of my life, to be my relationship with what I would have labeled differently at different times: spirituality, religion, faith, thinking. It's really something that has been a big part of my life, wherever I was, in that whole spectrum of considerations. And to have that messed with, I wouldn't like it a bit. And I did have it messed with growing up. I was brought up in a fundamentalist Southern Baptist family, and I was told, what was right and what was wrong, and I definitely rebelled against that. That was a big part of my youthful rebellion, was against fundamentalist Christianity. And I turned to Eastern kind of practices for many years from, as part of that. But to have that, to be deprived of that that would really feel like a loss of freedom to me.
Like we're losing our moral compass, our moral center of gravity. We argue, my morality is better than your morality, and people are lost. I hear even my friends and patients who are Christian, they argue differently about, things like abortion, things like, gay, trans, things like, giving away our money and, paying too little taxes, too much taxes. You can argue it from a religious vantage point or not, but I feel like I've lost what I grew up with, which was a moral compass. In both in Catholicism and psychoanalysis, that you had a sense that there was a rightness, something that was better than something else. And now I'm thinking of Katrina, what you said was replacing this sort of a selfishness. Even in my field, I'm supposed to help people with self-care and self-love and take care of yourself first. And like, whatever happened to caring about other people first? That's gone. I can't even find a theory to wrap my brain around it to suggest that they might want to do that.
But that's the glaring contradiction of what's going on right now. In the name of Christianity, there seems to be a lack of empathy and a caring for our neighbors. So is that a philosophical difference, or is there something problematic in in using religion of any kind to do things that seem to be against what I imagine is a shared moral compass, which is being kind to others, perhaps not.
Golden rule, kind of.
But the golden rule comes from Christianity. I think maybe we're at the point where some of you are saying, Jack, you're saying, if I'm here sort of hearing you right, that there's so many problems with Christianity, you know, Christian nationalism, this and that, and can't we just be kind to our neighbors? But I would ask, I think this is a really important question, and I don't seem to ever really get a good answer to it. If not Christianity, or if not the Judeo-Christian tradition, right, to sort of put it more broadly, then what? Where does our morality come from, and what does it consist of?
Well, I think there's a confusion and a conflation between Christianity that's driven by values and Christianity, or any religion that's about power, and the guise of Christianity.
I think in Christianity, there is a or religion, there is hierarchical ways of looking at things, which is different than, I don't want to use the word democratic, but for lack of a better word, you know, I think that we have lost some sense of hierarchy, you know, respect for elders, things like that. Work ethic, maybe. I don't know. People are, I think, you know, really, social media really had a lot to do with having people having other places to talk about things, and not so much room to be meditative and think. I mean, our society has really had a collapse, and I think social media is a big part of that.
We can probably trace this collapse back to the invention of the printing press.
Probably.
That's how I would put it anyway. And we're just living in the 500-year aftermath of the
But everything now goes so fast. Like, at least with
True.
reading something, you read it. There's no time to digest anything.
Yes. I think that's a place where our field could be very useful if we could start a movement for space and ritual and reflection and the coexistence of opposites, and including abstract and concrete, and internal and external. We're very, this is right, this is wrong, like, dislike, cancel, uncancel. And I feel so, if I try to say something nuanced on social media, I get attacked with, are you really saying this? Or how dare you think that? And that's not what I'm trying to say, but I get so lost in that accusation that I'm saying something, much more simple and concrete and one-sided than I actually am. It's a hard sell in today's world. But just talking, and just to see the bond between Katrina and Michelle, where is that on the world stage? But in 5 minutes you found it.
I mean, maybe part of this question is, how much diversity can the psychoanalytic field hold, other than the kinds of diversities that we've been focused on, which is fair enough to question that question, but the diversity of thoughts, why are there so few conservatives who are psychoanalysts, for example? What does that mean exactly?
They are, but they talk to me because they know I can hear them.
Right. Well, I'm to of Orthodox psychotherapists, but it's so frustrating for me because there it's totally the opposite. So it's a different echo chamber. So there are plenty of conservative people in this field. They just don't go to APSA. They will go to another organization. And that I get frustrated there because maybe the training isn't as rigorous. But the value part is I don't have to fight. I don't feel it, or most of the time I'm quiet. because, and I wonder about speaking out because it doesn't seem like anyone wants to listen. I mean, I'm not talking about this group, but in the larger group, you know, I'm also have to balance protecting myself
Right.
in terms of, you know, what I can, how I can, you know, influence something or protect myself. I have never posted on EPSA. I find the listserv extremely intimidating.
Well, maybe back to the points about hierarchy. I think you brought that up, or you mentioned that, Michelle. I mean, I was thinking, Alice, of what you said about the moral compass. Yes, I think as a society, we've lost our moral compass, even what I saw growing up. And I think some of you were resonating with that or talking about kind of what we had as children, the loss of the moral compass, and which is intimately related to hierarchy, right? I mean, it's in a way, it's the parents telling children how to behave and passing on that knowledge, and that children, you know, ought to respect their parents. And I think one of the problems with APSA is it's sort of given up on this hierarchy thing, that the leadership, as far as I can see, seems to capitulate to the most radical elements of the group, the most vocal and radical elements on the listserv. The leadership just capitulates without, you know, asking questions like, what is really being talked about here? You know, I mean, the most recent one being trans children, you know, and that really, I mean, that whole topic just really bothers me, because it's one thing for adults to make all kinds of decisions about their lives. It's another thing for children. Children ought to be protected. There's a reason we don't sell them alcohol. There's a reason we don't allow children to become tattooed, for instance. And it seems like no one is willing to be the parent and to say enough. Children need to be protected, and we need to have a moral compass here when it comes to how we treat children and how we work with their parents.
I'm not sure that that's a complex and nuanced enough consideration of children's gender dysmorphia. I mean, I think it can be very polarized, that anything the child asks for is fine versus nothing the child asks for is fine. And I think how to have the conversation without having it one or the other has been the difficulty.
Mhm.
And the fascination, what is it about the psyche in the country and in the analytic community that has taken such a small group of people and made this into such an important symbolic problem representation battle? There's something else going on, perhaps just scapegoating in general, or is there something very primal about gender that makes people really uncomfortable?
Well,
I
I
think go on, sorry.
I'm sorry, Michelle. I can weigh in, because I've thought about this a lot and gotten into a lot of conversations on this topic. I think it's fundamentally a philosophical question about the nature of reality. Are we made male and female in the image of God, or by biology? I mean, biology also tells us we're male and female. Or, you know, can we transcend those natural boundaries and become transhuman? I mean, the other part, the other side, that there's an explicitly transhuman agenda.
Again, I think that's a little bit of an extreme characterization. I mean, I think there's a natural distribution around genders that falls very strongly around male and female, but there's also a tremendous variations in terms of biology that is not just psychological, that is physical, is biological, and to sort of create a sort of straw man around this extreme case, I think misses the complexity of what this all means.
Mhm. one of the things that I learned over this week, because the whole gender dysphoria discussion was in our news because of this conference.
Oh, that's your institute?
Part of the meeting. The meeting covered that. What I discovered that, the meeting went so fast. And I was nearer to Katrina at the beginning of that meeting, but what I realized is that I have not read papers by anybody. I know that I do not know enough to talk about this subject intelligently. And if I wanted to, I would read, because there's like two different factions, I guess, about this issue. I would have loved to see some way of discussing it, because I don't think that one is all right and the other is all wrong. And the fact, and actually my reservation about supporting this conference was not because of the trait. People thought it was because, now I'm the out conservative with the religious person and everything, but it really was that there was legal action going on, and I felt that it wasn't safe. I wanted to protect my institute from politics. And we got into a very interesting discussion about how much politics gets included in being an analyst. And I think that's a really important debate. Because, when you're treating if doing this publicly, I treat all kinds of people, and I'm sure we all do. And, even I'll say, even being an Orthodox Jew, I have patients who may be struggling with their religion, and they have been, the treatment goes to a point where they say, I don't feel comfortable, because they have preconceptions of how I'm going to judge them, and then we work on it. But I do think that this politics thing really, really dilutes the transference in a way that is not good technique. And that's my thing, but I was totally shot down for that. I was told that we have to act immediately, because there was so much pressure about making this decision. It's a conference that's in the end, and all the institutes, but I felt that pressure. I didn't like being pressured to make a decision. But what it did for me was allowed me to realize how little I know about this subject that's coming up, and I'm wondering how much everybody else knows too.
Yeah, these days politics and medicine lead, and psychoanalysis follows along, because we don't know enough. And like I said on the listserv, I won't take these kids into my practice because they come with politics and medicine attached already. And you're making some kind of a value judgment if you go along with it or not.
Yeah, it's an impossible situation.
Impossible. And we should not have to surrender our tools because, people have political arguments to lead with, which is why I wonder, I'd love to invite some people who are pro, con, trans, not trans into this kind of arena.
I think it would be really helpful, because when you talk to real people, when I was a social work intern way back when, I ran a women's group, and a trans woman joined my group. It was so fascinating. And at that point, I think because it's gotten so politicized, there have been people who are unsure of themselves, who have gotten maybe themselves into puberty blockers or surgery without being, without being sure about it. There's been so much political influence, but those are the people that. So at this time, this was 1997. It wasn't so. This was a person who really had gender dysphoria, and I learned so much from her. Because she told me, she goes, I don't fit in anywhere, and I could really connect to her loneliness and help her. And she was a valuable member of that group. And this was a long time ago. But I think that it has gotten to, the numbers have exploded to such an extent that I worry about some people who, may have been influenced by a doctor or a therapist, and done something irreparable to themselves.
That's right.
We've suddenly moved to the topic of threat, I think. How threatened we feel, how threatened other people may feel. The pressure to make a decision maybe comes from a sense of danger too. It's funny how this seems like we've been here before.
Alex, I was resonating with what you said about politics and medicine, that I think you said politics and medicine lead and psychoanalysis follows. I think that that's really on point. And it makes me think that, you know, kind of what I said about progress, that politics and medicine are the main vehicles of enacting the progressive agenda. But as a result, I think it's a state of urgency, like Michelle said, we have to make this decision now, or this person needs this particular, you know, very new medical technological innovation now, like right now. You know, how did people live before puberty blockers, for instance, right? And I think maybe what's been lost in this atmosphere is philosophy. I think a psychoanalysis is more akin to philosophy, but it doesn't seem like there's room for those kinds of philosophical conversations. You know, even what Jack was saying about the diversity of I mean, I probably fundamentally disagree, but okay, let's have the conversation. Let's sit down. Let's have this sort of, you know, free-ranging philosophical conversation about what does it mean to be human, to be a man or a woman, or how much fluidity is there. It doesn't actually seem like those conversations are happening.
There are no conversations happening.
No,
Oh, there are no, but there are I mean,
yeah.
it's pontificating. Doesn't it sound like that?
Yeah.
We have our team. We can hide behind, our people who believe the truth, as opposed to the other guys who do not.
Mm-hmm.
And then we don't talk. We just argue at. And I think we should, bond together as a field with our ability to do this, to hold conflict and difference and explore without taking a position. And we can do that because in this arena, we're not telling people to go have puberty blockers and surgeries. We're just saying, who are you? And let's get to know each other. I mean, I'm sure I had some weird sexuality if, I was just talking to my best friend. Today is her birthday. And I think if anybody had known us back in second grade, they would have told us we were lesbian. We're both married with kids and still best friends. And I'm so delighted nobody ever told me, oh, you must be lesbian, because my life would have taken a very different turn.
And as Seinfeld would have said, what's wrong with that?
That makes me think. I was a major tomboy when I was growing up. I had 3 younger brothers, and it was climbing trees. I was fighting, like physically fighting with my brothers all the time, right? And nowadays, somebody would probably say to me, "You're a trans boy."
Yeah. And a vulnerable kid who's having conflicts about other family members or hearing voices from their teachers or their classmates, it's very easy to go down a path and then regret it later.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean the path is wrong. I've seen so many paths that turn out to be wonderful, but then everybody gets on board and then it goes wrong because the wrong people, not everybody's gonna live better with Prozac. Some people will jump out a window because it's disinhibiting and it'll make you manic and impulsively jump out a window. It doesn't mean Prozac is bad. It just means you don't hand it out to everybody. But we don't give people the space to find who they are and where they belong, and a community that honors them. And I think we can do that. I think our field is capable of creating those spaces if we can just stop.
I run a support group for people with chronic pain. And so the group is people all across the country, very different. And I had a very angry liberal person on there. And it was very, I could feel the tension. And at some point I said, we're a group of people all across the country, many different ideas. But I think, but the commonality we have is that we're all in pain. and the world is all in pain right now.
Mm.
And I said, we can share our pain, and it doesn't have to be partisan. And then I was accused of being a racist. I mean, that's how tense things are. You know, so when you try to talk, if people are not in the frame to talk, think about a patient that is in that kind of position. You know, you can't force somebody to talk. You know, there are reasons why they're not talking. But there's a lot of angry people, a lot of hurt people, a lot of angry people, a lot of afraid people. So, you know, we've all kind of, regressed. Our society has regressed. It's really, we're living in a world of projective identification.
That's right.
You know, when you say that, Michelle, it makes me think we've lost the virtue of forgiveness. You know, I think about that when I go to Mass, and I think probably the wisest words that have come out of Christianity is forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us.
Mm-hmm.
And I was actually telling a friend of mine recently, I said, if we could all live by just that one passage, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us, the world would be a much better place if we could just live by that one injunction. And I think in this kind of, the sort of the moralizing and the virtue signaling, right? And the liberals are better than the conservatives and all of that. There's no forgiveness left. Nobody, you're being called a racist rather than this person finding it in their heart to forgive you, even if you did say something that rubbed them the wrong way.
I just said to be nonpartisan, though. That's all.
Yeah, it's not even offensive. But let's say somebody is offended, right? Why not forgive rather than hold a grudge?
I mean, it seems like it's sort of this making the progressives in the boogeyman in the irony that the government is running on exactly the opposite of that.
Mm-hmm.
The significantly religiously driven government is running on the opposite of that. And what does that mean in terms of, I mean, it has the potential to totally destroy the meaning of the religious principles by the way they're being used.
Well, religion has always been perverted. And
Right.
there are a lot of, we don't even have to look very far to see some of the horrible abuses that have come in the name of religion. So, I think that I agree with what you're saying, but that doesn't mean that religion is a bad thing. It can be used in ways that are very intolerant and hostile.
Right. So I guess the psychoanalysis can be used in the wrong way. And
Oh boy, can
like in Russia. So how do we keep the purity and the authenticity and the spirit of all these things that are potentially religious?
Mm-hmm.
And things that aren't so obvious? The subtle ways in which the religion corrupts or practice corrupts.
I think that psychoanalysis is kind of like a religion.
Yeah.
And that is dangerous,
Hey,
and it is misused as if, the analogy just got me, that in the name of you could think you were crazy if you were in the middle of a very, very stormy transference with your analyst, and it's not healthy. There are many people who have been destroyed by their analyses.
Right.
So that this is a profession that really, it needs so much humility. And there's so much hubris. And also we're talking about the election. One of the ideas in this meeting was about having two experts, but they were two progressive experts to speak. But I don't think we need experts. I don't think we need the experts here.
I think we're able to slow down in a one-on-one session, slow down, go the pace we need to go.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. A minute ago, I said, well, yeah, psychodynamic thought for me was kind of a religion there for a while. And what it was I gained that ability not just in that, but also in meditation and some other practices. But I gained the ability to be able to back off and slow down and give space to myself and to the other person. And I'm trying to think now, how do we do that in a large group? You know, I mean, I think we do it in concerts sometimes. I watched this great guy. Oh, he's wonderful. His name is Jacob Collier. And his, oh, you know, and you're shaking your head, Jack. His claim to fame is that he turns the audience in these large stadium concerts into a choir. Gestures. You do this note, you do this note. And then he's very skilled at it. He was brought up in a family that's very musical. His mom's a conductor. And so he's kind of like the magical conductor. But what happens, I mean, when you watch videos, I've watched a bunch of his videos, you see people just kind of going, woo, you know, I mean, it's really moving to them. So music is one way that we do that. Meditation groups, conversations. Alice is talking lately about rituals. I mean, I think those are all things that can happen in large groups that slow things down and have the possibility of making space, holding space. But I don't really have much more of an answer than that. That's not much of an answer.
But I think you're describing a transcendent experience, a group of people coming together, singing together, being a part of something bigger than themselves.
Well, and how is that different from a Trump rally?
Same thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we're talking about the analytic third in a group. That's that we have the potential for that. We also have the potential for acrimony and fighting and hatred and all that. But it takes a lot more work to build something up.
When it's done in email listservs, it's the aggression comes to the surface. We don't have people and faces and our humanity. We just have words on a page that you offended me, so how dare you? That's just not working. And then in political groups where you have to make a decision about who's coming to a meeting, that's charged in a different kind of way. You have arguments and votes and bad feelings. But I think in arenas like this, we can give each other the space and set it up that way, that just to listen and put it in a larger context and have the analytic third be present and let people who are, trans, who have different perspectives on it, and they can reference the science or the politics, but not have that be the fuel. Just our different humanities, and we can question each other and think that our questions will be honored and not ridiculed. And see where that goes. And I'd love to empower our field to say, this is what we have. This is our strength. It's not our weakness.
It is our strength. So what's the problem?
Well,
how do you make an interpretation to a group of people like ABSA?
Well, I think one of the things that's unique about psychoanalysis, at least in its ideal, is that it recognizes how much time it takes to make authentic change. And that's becoming less and less possible for economic reasons, for cultural reasons. People can't take the time. So people are moving to, we're going to manage a symptom, shut a symptom down without really dealing with anything that goes under it. So all of these conversations require time. And there's no time, there's no commitment. They're firing half the government with taking no time.
True. Yeah, we need.
And so how do we bring the insight into it takes time to a culture that doesn't want to make time or doesn't have the capacity to make time? I think that's the unique contribution. And so what I'm concerned about, Alice, with this idea that we can save the world is our basic method is being able to take time to go one step at a time to sort of deal with each other in a long-term way. And that goes against where the culture is headed, unfortunately.
Yeah, but I think we're ready for it, or almost ready. I've been on TikTok lately, and I was on for a while, then I stopped, and then I went back, and I see some of the same people saying variations of the same thing over and over.
Yeah.
And they're sort of desperate to communicate something, but they're communicating to nobody or their own echo chamber. And I think they might be ready to transition to a different arena. I'm actually, if Matt is listening, he's helping me develop the early stages of an app, which I can't afford to fund, but I can, arrange to do some pilot projects, getting people like us to talk together and see if we can develop a space for these kinds of conversations, for the ritual, or the time to get to know other people and solve problems together, and have it be interesting and fun and benefit in ways that people will come to appreciate. I get the feeling that we might be on the verge of rediscovering that. I could be wrong, but I'm almost 73, so it's now or never. It's just an app where people can talk like this periodically, once.
I mean, how would people would talk in real time?
Yeah.
How would it organize? You just have hours that it would be open, or?
Well, you start out with dyads, matching, almost like, a dating site, but matching with people who think differently about a particular topic or come from a different center, and then expand to somewhat larger groups and set up times to do that, and email in between. Address a conflict, or just be curious about someone's different culture. I mean, I'd love to get to know, most people who come from, just a completely different world, and just see how they view us and how we view them, and, learn something from engaging with people, whether they live down the street or on the other side of the world.
And Alice, it would be like this, like via Zoom, audio, video?
Yes. Well, as Matt, I don't know anything about technology at all. Matt and some other colleagues are helping us sort of design. I'd like to do some early experiments, just get some people agree to do it a few times at dyads or small groups, and help us develop something. And then maybe if we get some data and something going, we can get some funders to come in and help us actually set the thing up.
Kind of makes me think of those libraries. I think Denmark maybe has them, where you can check a person out. You can say, I'd like to talk to a female poet, or I would like to talk to a person with bipolar disorder, or, and people sign up to be volunteers to be checked out for a 30-minute conversation.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, I'm picturing something like that.
The other ingredient of this is curiosity, is really having a level of curiosity.
Yes.
Which it tends to slow down the quick progression. It's
right. But we have that capacity. When we started saying, oh, there are trans people, all these trans people popped up. We can say there are curious people. There are people who like paradox, and go invite them to come to the surface. I don't know. I'm fishing around for ways to do it without a lot of money being involved.
Resistance, though, because people are so afraid of being with people not like them.
Right.
I mean, I see what happens with you. Well, I see with Katrina what happens. It's terrible.
It is.
And I just read the the emails, and sometimes I get so upset, you know, where I'll see like a string of emails, like no one thinks anywhere near what I'm thinking about. And I know that I'm more than my thoughts about politics. I'm so much more than that. So all of us are.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so you're missing like 80% of a person,
Yeah.
which
That's
is the same.
right. Yeah.
It's interesting you talking about this app, Alice, and makes me think about this shift that some thinkers have been talking about recently, the shift from a written culture to an oral culture. And I think since the invention of the printing press, we've largely had a written culture. You know, you had the rise of novels, you know, the rise of experts. You really can't have these, you know, kind of scientific reports without it being a largely written culture. And some people have been decrying the shift to more of an oral culture. You know, something like TikTok is very much part of oral culture. But actually, as we're talking, and I just had this insight as we're talking about it, I think there are actually a lot of advantages to the shift back to an oral culture. Of course, it's oral culture with technology is what we have and what we're going to have. But in maybe kind of even thinking about the listserv, that there is something very alienating about just seeing the words on a piece of paper or on a screen, and that actually even if we disagree, even if there are, you know, kind of these opposing opinions, there is something about hearing the person's voice, you know, seeing them even on video. And I wonder actually if that might heal us. Is this return back to a more oral means of communicating? And then, of course, I think, well, psychoanalysis at its heart is an oral process.
Absolutely.
Very, very true.
And there's such a difference between like the listserv and email and exactly what you're saying. I'm just saying repeating what you're saying in that respect.
Yeah. And plus, you know, AI is going to be doing all the written, and kids don't read anyway.
Right.
I work with teachers, and they say they'll assign, they'll send an assignment, and they'll get back TLDR, too long, didn't read, as the homework assignment. You know, yeah, I think some alternating with the in-person, the you know, Zoom, FaceTime, whatever, and written can really, and you know, help us rediscover our humanity. And
I think it's gotten to such a crisis point.
yeah, it's I think we can do this just by slowly inching out. I'd love to invite, if we can, get a couple of people who are on different ends of the trans question to join us next time, if we can find some. Invite them to listen to this meeting and see if they're willing to come on and just listen and ask questions and tolerate the discomfort of being challenged, and see where that goes, and maybe help APSA to kind of see that we need to do something different than attack each other.
Are you thinking it would be people within the professional community of psychodynamic therapy, or just anybody?
Ideally, I guess I'd like to keep this with analysts for now, just because we think in a way that I've done it with other people who come from other areas, and they don't know how to think analytically, and they go off in their own language, and it's a little harder to sort of find
Makes sense.
the analytic third. So if possible, I guess I'd like for now to keep it within the analytic community. But
Just a reminder, I'm analyst adjacent, so.
no, the APSA community, you don't have to be an analyst. A group analyst is
That's what we need. We need you, Jack. I think Jack should I would bring you to my institute. We really need help. No, I'm not kidding, because you really do have that technique. None of us were trained in this.
Well, I'm working with a colleague to do the next online group relations conference for analysts. And one of my colleagues said he's working with 6 different institutes right now.
Really?
There's at least 6 institutes right now who are struggling with some dynamic issue.
I believe it.
Yeah. And I want to step back a second and just sort of talk about like how we're feeling right now, So imagining this conversation, Katrina, I was thinking in my mind, oh my goodness, are you going to try to change me? Are you going to try to convince us? Like what level of, what level of battle is this going to be at what philosophical level, And I realized that it is so much easier to sort of create a negative projection around something than to sort of be present. And, I think we've unpacked 1% of what each of our history is that got us to this particular place.
Right.
But I think creating a space to sort of, okay, let's step back for a second and slow it down, as you said, just sort of to realize that there is a conversation to be had.
Thank you, Jack. Yeah, I think that's where I'm at too, that there is a conversation to be had. And Alice, I think you're inspiring me maybe to no longer kind of get into those fights by writing a paragraph here or there, but instead maybe we should get a group together. There are some players I'm not going to name names, because this will go on YouTube and people may not, want it known that they're participating or what their positions are. But we know there are some players who've put forth their positions, and I'm one of them. And I wonder if we can get a group of people like that together and actually just have a conversation rather than this sort of back and forth of the written word.
I'm struck by the fact that we were going to talk about God today, but we've moved in a lot of different directions.
God is speaking through us today.
Jack, I love that. That is a great way to put it.
Whatever that means to each of us.
Yes. You have the freedom to think about what it means to you to help you. But a lot of people have very, very, fraught feelings about God. It's a very controversial topic. I guess we got that there.
Well, part of it is, I think we all think
authority.
Yeah. We think at different levels of abstraction, and we imbue authority with all sorts of benign or, dangerous levels of meaning. So individually, God becomes our own projection. But I think of God as the most beautiful question on the planet. Like, who are we? Where did we come from? Why are we here? Where are we going? How do we get there? In this moment and for future generations. And so that question for me, it makes it unnecessary to decide whether there is a God or not. There's something, there's some integration of science and spirituality and creativity, asking new questions and inching toward finding a better answer to what are we doing here and how do we live without killing each other.
And authority isn't all bad. Knowing that there's someone in charge, we can trust, which we don't have. But if we had that, that's like the benevolent superego.
Exactly. Yeah. Right now we're Lord of the Flies. We need that, and maybe if we can create that, even the analytic third in this kind of arena, as some organizing, overarching meaning that keeps us from, not honoring each other's humanity and understanding it. I don't know.
One other obvious thing is, there are 4 women and 1 man in this conversation. And I think there's a whole question around gender, again, not in the more controversial sense, but in terms of like in the culture, who's able to have certain conversations, who isn't. And, you know, the question at this, you know, are women having conversations that are very different than men around this? And is there some capacity around asking these questions that we need to think about?
Good question. Yeah.
So one of my favorite things in the world is later Heidegger. And I couldn't read early Heidegger, big, thick book, made no sense to me. Later Heidegger speaks to me. I've read and reread and reread and reread stuff. And what he tried to do in the later part of his life, and of course, Heidegger was a Nazi and, you know, had a love affair with the Jewish woman who had to leave Germany because of Nazism, and it was Hannah Arendt. She was his student, and you know, I mean, there's all this stuff you could say about him that makes you just kind of go, ew. But he was trying to do this thing in the end of his life. He was trying to write about thinking without resorting to either metaphysics or philosophy or religion. And it's real interesting to read him trying to do that. He basically comes out with a whole bunch of poetry and then the pre-Socratics. And I think he's bordering in all of that. He's saying, oh, I'm not yet talking about being, I'm just on the edge of it. But when he tries to stop himself from either being philosophical, metaphysical, or religious in these pursuits, what he ends up doing is he's talking about things in an indirect way. There's no direct, here's a straight shot, you know, here's Zeno's era, you know, and I'm going to, here's the truth. It's all suggestion, implication, metaphor. And that's what really turns me on about all of that. That if you really kind of make it your goal, as I think what he was trying to do is avoid the pitfalls of those things of religion, philosophy, metaphysics, and which meant he had to stop short of certainty and stop short of directness and moved into more suggestion and metaphor. So that's just, you're saying we don't know so much about each other, and it's true, we really don't know so much about each other. We probably know more about Katrina now than we do any of the others of us, because she's, you know, spoken up. But that's a really big important part of all of this to me, is how can you speak about truth without destroying it.
You know, what's interesting though, in my institute experience, which was not, it did not descend into hate, and I think it has potential. But the first time when I said I didn't think exactly like they did, there was an absolute silence, which was very uncomfortable. And I think that absolute silence has to happen. That discomfort has to happen. And then, you know, I think people are sort of, they didn't know that I thought that way. So it was like a surprise. You know, they didn't, it was unexpected. And so it's hard, I think, to, you know, it's interesting because, you know, I have a pain condition, which I've had for 10 years, a serious neurological thing, which is very painful. And I've had to learn a lot about pain by being in pain. And seeing a person in pain is sometimes more difficult than being in pain yourself. And so I think there was a process that was going on that was probably very valuable.
But silence is one of the most interesting things because it has so many meanings. So we started this conversation and Katrina talked for a while, and then there was this complete silence. And, you know, I was just wondering what was the bubbles going on in everybody's head about, you know, what does that mean, you know? and to sit in it long enough, to just let it percolate. And yeah.
That really is an analytic process.
Mhm.
So we do have what to offer.
Absolutely.
So I'm convinced. I don't know how you're going to get the other people to be convinced.
So the thing we can offer is take a lot of time and be silent.
Well, let's think about it. We'll have to stop in 3 minutes. Think about where we can go from here. I'd love to sort of move this group forward and also move into the analytic community and invite them to think about this in a different kind of way. So maybe we can all think about how we would frame it, and within a couple of days, Matt will send us the link. And then we can maybe send something together to APSA.
Okay, that'd be nice. Yeah.
If we can compose either 5 separate sentences or a composition that we all edit together.
And send it to the wider analytic community. Is that what?
Yeah, post it on the APSA listserv.
Oh, on APSA. Okay, yeah.
And we could also send it to other analytic groups if, yeah.
Well, I'm definitely open to that conversation, and hopefully we do get people who are interested who have differing viewpoints.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think since it came up and it's related to science and truth and process and God and the whole sexuality, gender question, and it's an active issue in APSA, that it would be helpful to explain why we're inviting them and what the goal is, and see if we can get people from who have different perspectives on the problem to talk to us. And I think Cameron said he was going to be back for the next meeting.
Good.
He wants to join us. He just
Of another man.
couldn't make it today.
Present as to be correct, to say presenting as male.
Oh, right. I have to say, this was a breath of fresh air after a very difficult week. And so thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I enjoyed it too. I hope that
Glad you joined us today, Michelle.
we're getting somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I will get in touch by email and we'll take it from here.
Wonderful. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Bye, you all.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Buddy.